From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. It's Thursday, May 21st, 2015. Los Angeles becomes the largest city in the nation to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We'll speak with Laphonza Butler, co-convener of the Raise the Wage Coalition and president of SEIU California. And in the ongoing fight to process thousands of backlogged rape kits, we'll turn to Natasha Alexenko, founder of the Natasha Justice Project, and journalist Abigail Tracy of Vocativ. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika, assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hi, how you doing?
The Islamic State in Iraq and Syria has taken over the entire Syrian city of Palmyra and apparently controls half the entire country. Palmyra, known for its ancient ruins, lies north of the capital Damascus and once lay on the famed ancient Silk Road. Given the propensity of ISIS to destroy ancient artifacts, historians fear that Palmyra's ruins are in grave danger. ISIS is also likely to take advantage of the city's gas fields and the fact that it lies at the nexus of many intersecting roads, enabling the group access to even more of Syria. Many thousands have already evacuated the city of 65,000 residents. The capture of Palmyra comes just days after ISIS took over the key Iraqi city of Ramadi, in what are being seen as stunning successes for the militant Sunni rebel group. ISIS has massacred untold numbers of Iraqis and Syrians just in the past few weeks. Well, Chenjerai, how is it that a ragtag group of rebels has enjoyed so much success so fast, despite having the might of the U.S. and several of its allies arrayed against it?
Yeah, this is the question that everyone's looking at. I think, it's tempting to say that it's the sheer force of their willingness to use violence. But of course, ISIS doesn't have a monopoly on the use of violence to kill civilians. I think their funding, they've been innovative in terms of finding ways to fund themselves, and the capture of Palmyra's ruins will probably be used in this way. But also, opposing ISIS requires that several different parties who typically disagree, meaning like some of the individual tribes in Syria and Iraq, as well as parties like the U.S. and Iran, have to find ways to work together in order to counter them. So I think it's all these things. I mean, ISIS didn't come from nowhere. ISIS built on Al-Qaeda and is able to draw in soldiers who are being formed in various conflicts, some of which the U.S. has foreign policy has a lot to do with. So
Right.
It's really a big problem.
A bizarre twist in the Rohingya refugee crisis has just emerged, days after boats carrying thousands of people hailing from Burma's persecuted Muslim minority were discovered off the coast of Malaysia. The African nation of Gambia has offered to take them in. The government of Myanmar does not consider Rohingya as Burmese citizens, despite their presence in the country for generations. Waves of migration through human trafficking networks have led to an exodus of Rohingya families. Those found on the boats have been trapped there for months in horrific conditions, with Malaysia, Indonesia and Thailand all refusing to accept the refugees. Now, Gambia's government has released a statement saying, quote, as human beings, more so fellow Muslims, it's a sacred duty to help alleviate the untold hardships and sufferings fellow human beings are confronted with. But Gambia's president, Yahya Jammeh, has been criticized for ignoring a similar crisis of African migrants dying in the Mediterranean Sea as they attempt to reach Europe. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is due to meet with Myanmar officials and has been urged by dozens of lawmakers here to address the Rohingyas' persecution. Chenjerai, what do you make of Gambia's offer?
Well, the Rohingya people are one of the world's most persecuted minorities, a stateless people, and as such, they're subject to being used as pawns in the political efforts of various leaders. And so I think we have to look carefully on the statements by Gambia's president. I mean, on one hand, it's encouraging, he's willing to take them in. On the other hand, I think we are right to question how he's treating the Muslim population in his own country who has been trying to get to Europe. We can also simply look skeptically on the U.S.'s efforts, humanitarian efforts. I mean, there's many populations that the U.S. affects, here, looking like the debate about immigration here, and say, to what extent are we actually really concerned with helping disenfranchised populations? So we have to raise questions about how vulnerable people get used as political pawns.
And finally, here in the U.S., a number of organizations, including the Black Youth Project 100, Black Lives Matter, and Ferguson Action, have launched a National Day of Action today, with protests scheduled across the country. The actions are aimed at drawing attention to the often underreported police and vigilante violence against Black women and girls, including queer and transgender women. Under the banner of Black Women and Girls Matter, activists hope to draw attention to the cases of Rakia Boyd, Ayanna Jones, Alicia Thomas, and Maya Hall, among many others. Actions are planned in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, and other cities, and come a day after the African American Policy Forum released a report entitled Say Her Name, Resisting Police Brutality Against Black Women. Chenjerai, how important is the series of actions today?
This is extremely important. This is a movement that we've seen kind of be a little bit on the margins of the Black Lives Matter movement. People mentioning these names, trying to get women and transgender persons to be addressed, the violence against them. But now we're seeing coordinated effort, and I think it's extremely important. Also, I encourage everyone to check out the report by the African American Policy Forum. In it, you'll find similar, evidence of similar disparities in what we see of young unarmed African American men. For example, in 2013, all the women stopped in New York, 13.4% were white, 53.4% were Black, and 27.5% were Latino. So this is a problem, and I'm glad to see that these other populations and folks are being drawn into the conversation and being put at the center of it.
Right, and of course we should remind ourselves that many of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement have been Black women and members of the Black, queer, and transgender community. Thank you so much, Chenjerai, for joining us.
That's right.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is our daily news flash guest expert and assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. Los Angeles recently became the largest U.S. city to adopt a plan to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The LA City Council voted 14-1 to raise the current base wage of $9 an hour to $15 by the year 2020. The increase will be phased in over a 5-year period, allowing businesses with fewer than 25 workers an extra year to catch up. The decision could impact up to 800,000 workers in the Los Angeles area. And LA now joins Chicago, San Francisco, and Seattle among a growing list of cities upping the minimum wage to what low-wage workers in a number of industries are demanding. LA's move will likely reverberate around the nation, where the call for $15 an hour is becoming the new norm. Meanwhile, as McDonald's Corporation is holding its 2-day shareholder meeting on May 20th and 21st, thousands of workers and their supporters showed up to rally at the corporation's headquarters in Illinois. McDonald's banned media from attending the meeting. Joining me in studio today is Laphonza Butler, co-convener of the Raise the Wage Coalition, president of SEIU, ULTCW, and SEIU California. She's been intimately involved in this struggle locally, where this program is produced. Welcome to Uprising, Laphonza.
Thank you, Sonali. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks so much for joining us. Well, first First, what led to the victory? Obviously, the City Council, it didn't just decide on its own to pass the bill, although there have been recently many sympathizers to the cause. But how did people work hard to organize outside the halls of City Hall and lobby the City Council to do what it did?
Well, Sonali, I think you characterized it right. Workers, everyday average people, sort of took time off from work, organized on their lunch, but the conversation started way before Los Angeles started to consider this. The mayor created this conversation in September, on Labor Day of 2014. He introduced a plan that would increase the wage to $13.25 an hour by 2017 and then indexed after that. And I think that is really what got people engaged. I think that people appreciated the mayor's proposal, but knew that it required more to live in Los Angeles. And the fast food workers, you mentioned McDonald's, fast food workers and other low-wage workers all across the country have been really talking about the fight for 15 and putting out this call that it really requires $15 an hour to live a basic standard of living. And so everyday people decided that they were going to put together this coalition called Raise the Wage. Over 260 organizations all across the city. Myself and Rusty Hicks, the head of the Los Angeles Federation of Labor, have been serving as its co-conveners. And how did we organize? We have been in council every day working people every day. We've attended every single hearing. We have been a part of the learning of the council, where there were 3 studies and a peer review to study the studies. And I think the council really heard the voices of their constituents. Such a large coalition and everyday workers really can't be ignored.
Now, let's talk about exactly what the resolution says. There's a 5-year phase-in period, and by 2020, the minimum wage in the city of LA will be $15 an hour. And is that for all workers in LA? Are there exemptions, for example, for tipped workers?
There are no exemptions, and the mayor really...
There are no exemptions?
There are no exemptions.
That's a big victory.
That is a very big victory. The mayor set that tone early. Even in his proposal, he proposed no exemptions. Everybody should move to a quality wage to provide a quality standard of living for Angelenos. And so you hit the high points. It's $15 by 2020 for employers that employ more than 25 workers. For the employers that employ less than 25 workers, they have an extra year to catch up. Also having an extra year to catch up are organizations, social services organizations, federally and state-funded nonprofits, really nonprofits who pay their CEO, I think it's 5 times what they pay their lowest paid worker. So the council really did build in some catch-alls. Those childcare, daycare centers where the margins are so slim and they really rely on state funding to make sure that those businesses can stay open. And so there's a lot of places where the council is allowing an extra year to catch up. But I think principally they're focused on creating a wage that LA workers can live on.
And I understand that the yearly wage increases after 2020 would be actually pegged to the consumer price index?
That is right.
So what does that mean?
That is another huge victory.
Yeah.
It means that no longer are workers going to be losing ground annually as the inflation or cost of living goes up. That whatever the cost of living is measured at in the consumer price index, that is the amount that workers will also receive as an increase. And
so that means that in 2020, if $15 an hour has not caught up to the consumer price index, we could see even higher than $15 an hour.
Well, the council,
or is it after that?
Well, the council pegged it to do CPI increases starting in 2022.
I see.
So once all of the large businesses have gotten to 15 by 2020, the smaller businesses and nonprofits get there by 2021, and then in 2022, the wages will be indexed to CPI. And there are 20 localities across the country who have created their own minimum wage standards, and only 3 have not done CPI. And so it's clear that no one is interested, local officials aren't interested in having this political debate over and over and over again. We want to, I think it says that elected officials are ready to respect the value of work and to make sure that that value keeps up with the cost of living.
And that's amazing, because every time these battles show, people have to build so much work to fight these battles. If we just look at the federal level, where the minimum wage is some ridiculously paltry amount because it's frozen in stone from the last time when it might have made sense once upon a time to have $7 and change an hour.
Sure.
And all these years later, it's well below poverty level wages. So let's talk about, because this is a national program, let's talk about what the ingredients were, as far as you could tell, for replicating, that went into this LA victory that can be used to replicate such a victory elsewhere. We've mentioned not only the hard organizing work of people like yourself and workers, but also sympathetic elected officials. Are those the 2 main ingredients that you see?
No. I think they're important ingredients. Of course, the organizing, the voices of the community is incredibly important to any victory, whether it's raising the wage or improving affordable housing. I think that elected leadership is also an incredible ingredient. They have to actually pass the policies. They are who people elect to create the society that we all want. I think another important ingredient that we can't forget is the environment in which this is happening. Fast food workers started this conversation of $15 and a union 2 years ago. Prior to them, if you recall, during the depths of the Great Recession, there was the Occupy movement that really started this conversation about income inequality. And then academics started to catch on, where economists have started to name the biggest problem of our generation being income inequality. And so the environment shifted from this from the conversation of the lack of resources in our community to really talking about why that lack exists. And it's not because there is not resources in our communities. It's because only one side of the community actually was benefiting from the prosperity of our economy. And so I think the environment is an incredibly important part of getting to actual success across the country. And I think that now is the moment.
Now, what do you make of the disappointment from those who say, well, phasing this in over a 5-year period is still not fast enough? People are struggling today. Of course, businesses have a completely different approach, and I'll bring their critique up in a minute. But
Sure.
When responding to this end of the critique, how do you do that?
I think it's a fair critique. It is. It's not as if 5 years from now rent won't be higher. It's not as if 5 years from now the cost of gas won't be higher. And so I think that it's a very fair critique. And the Raise the Wage Coalition went in to this with a much more aggressive push in terms of the pace of the increases.
What would you have liked to have seen in an ideal world?
Seattle is at 2017. San Francisco is at 2019.
The phase-in period.
The phase-in period, get into 15 by that time period. We would have rather seen something that got to somewhere in that time period. What I would say is the council, I think, tried to take a balanced approach. There's 800,000 Angelenos that are going to be covered by this policy. Nowhere near the numbers in either the city of Seattle or San Francisco. And so with Los Angeles being the largest city to actually move this policy forward, I think they're trying to be cautious. I think there's some monitoring of the policy and the impact of the policy also included in what was approved. And so I think that the council is trying to be responsible, trying to be cautious, but workers need it now. And hopefully what this policy will do is inspire other good employers to actually improve the wage faster. A part of our coalition was the St. John's Health Clinic, local nonprofit in South Los Angeles, run by a great CEO, Jim Mangia. Last year, he improved his workers' wages to $15 an hour.
So some businesses just doing it voluntarily.
Some businesses are just doing it voluntarily.
You brought up the fact that, rent doesn't wait for minimum wage increases. The Economic Policy Institute in March released a study showing that 57% of Los Angelinos cannot afford to live in LA. It found, quote, people who are single and have no kids still need to make an estimated $34,324 a year just to have decent living conditions. And that's still much higher than what $15 an hour working full-time would make over the entire year. Even at $15 an hour, now a majority can't afford to live in LA.
Sure.
I mean, that's terrible.
I think it speaks to a lot of ails that Los Angeles needs to focus on. There is not an abundance of affordable housing in Los Angeles. We are facing incredible challenges in our environment. We have we've sort of stagnated in the creation of new jobs. We're not yet in the movement of the green economy and preparing workers to participate in the green economy. And I think that lots of our local and state officials are starting to wrap their minds around how to prepare Los Angeles for the economy of the future and to try to get at some of the ailments that are continuing to hold our economy and our workers back. And I think we have a long way to go to get there.
So the fight is not over. It might take a different tenor or a different target.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So let's talk about the business end of the critique. The standard business community response when such things happen was reflected in the statement by Ruben Gonzalez of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, who told the LA Times, quote, the very people that council members' rhetoric claims to help with this action, it's going to hurt. So he's essentially saying that by paying people more, we're apparently hurting them. How do you respond? And of course, the implication being that if you pay people more, businesses will be forced to lay off workers, and so people might lose their jobs.
Sure. I think, as you said, every time there is an effort to raise the minimum wage or to improve the standards of living for Angelino workers, business sort of has the same response. And the truth is, when you look over the history of California's first minimum wage in 1812, business made the exact same argument.
They need to find a new justification, a new line, because this one ain't.
And since then, Los Angeles and California as a whole has become the world's 8th largest economy. And so I think the Chamber and other business leaders should try to engage in the conversation and engage in the debate about the kind of communities that we need to create in order for their businesses to thrive. People need money to spend in order to be be full participants in this consumer-based economy that we have.
Right. If you take the same logic, then the less we pay people, the better it'll be for business. And if you just take it all the way to its origin, we've got slavery.
That's definitely been our experience of the last 30 years. There have been numerous publications, the last I recall in the Washington Post, where you show the decline of the middle class and the decline of wages and the decline of labor unions, really following the same track. As production has gone up, as profitability has gone up, workers and their buying power has gone down. And so we find ourselves in this 99% and 1% equation. And we've got to figure out how to turn that around and really create a fair and prosperous society for all who participate.
And didn't the example, for I believe it was the city of SeaTac, which was one of the first, if not the first city to raise to $15 an hour, showed that, the sky didn't fall when $15 an hour became the new minimum wage. In fact, I believe some businesses expanded.
That's exactly right. SeaTac, a small little airport city right outside of Chicago, I'm sorry, right outside of
Seattle.
Seattle, increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour by ballot. And there have been incredible expansion in and around for businesses and communities in and around the SeaTac airport and the SeaTac community. And I think it's a great story about when people decide that their value is more. And they demand it and can voice that demand with the courage of their convictions, we can all prosper.
Now, the LA Times called the city council vote to raise LA's minimum wage, quote, the latest show of organized labor's clout at City Hall. And I'm wondering what you make as a member of organized labor, whether you feel that we might be at the beginnings of a slow increase in labor's clout, which has precipitously declined, as you mentioned earlier.
Sure. I think the LA Times sort of misses what the true definition of labor union is.
You mean you're not a labor boss who's wielding all this untold power at corporations?
I am an everyday, average Angelino whose mom was a caregiver and a home care worker, worked in a nursing home, who takes home the shared pain and struggles of the members that I work for, and try to say to my 8-month-old daughter that every day I am doing something to make her future better.
You have an 8-month-old.
I have an 8-month-old.
That's incredible.
And so it's, there's no labor boss. There is no.
You're not a union boss.
And so, the union is the organization where everyday people get a chance to have as much power and influence as the LA Times. We are their voice. And I think the vote shows that everyday people are finally getting their voices heard. And to me, that's okay.
So how do you hope for this decision in Los Angeles to have a ripple effect throughout the country? I'm sure you're keeping tabs on where the efforts are leading, and with LA being the largest city, people are looking to New York, looking to other big cities as well.
Sure. My hope and my vision as an international vice president for SEIU is that what happened in Los Angeles gives other everyday citizens the courage to appreciate their value and demand it. I hope it gives elected officials like Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio the courage to act with the courage of their convictions. And I think that hopefully for community organizations and labor unions and nonprofits and good business owners, I think it should suggest that there is nothing that we can't accomplish when we all work together for the common good of our communities.
Laphonza, I want to ask you about how we need to see this movement nationally, but also specifically in Los Angeles. Every rally that I've been to, the Fight for 15 rally that I've been to, one of the things that jumps out at me right away is the sense that this is really a movement, or should be seen as a movement for racial justice. This is a movement that seems to be dominated by black and brown folks, and I don't think we should gloss over that point.
I think that is an incredibly important point, Sonali. Every rally that I go to, the workers that I represent are black and brown folks who are seeing their racial justice tied inextricably to their economic justice. That these are communities of color that have traditionally been in low-wage jobs that have been left behind in our economy. And they are tying together. As a matter of fact, the last march and rally in Los Angeles the rally was emceed by the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is, I think, incredibly important for the social and racial justice in our communities and organizations that are a part of that part of the progressive movement, to really see communities of color that are left behind have been left behind historically, economically. If you look at South Los Angeles or East Los Angeles, where a lot of black and brown people live in this city, there are a few people who are living there are these very low-wage earners who are working in our service economy, who are dishwashers and cooks, home care workers and nursing home workers, servers and bartenders,
nail
salon workers,
car wash workers,
valet
valets,
attendants.
absolutely.
And so you are exactly right. The structural racism that has existed in our society has to be attached to our economic justice. Both things have to move forward together. And the great thing about the Fight for 15 movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the fight for comprehensive immigration reform is I think, a representation of, I think, the movement that is building, that people are definitely beginning to see. And organizations like SEIU are beginning to see that we can't win on one without winning on all.
That intersectionality is crucial.
Crucial.
Well, Laphonza, where can our audience find out more about your work, and particularly those of our audience in other parts of the country who are hoping to see Los Angeles' this victory replicated in their city?
Sure. Online, we are at laraisethewage.org. There are all kinds of pieces of information, worker stories, experiences of the campaign that people can find there. They can click to sort of sign up to continue to be a part of the communication of what's happening in Los Angeles. And as it relates to the work of SEIU, folks can go to SEIU-ultcw.org.
And we'll post those websites on uprisingwithsonali.com. Laphonza, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you, Sonali. Thanks for the great conversation and coverage of such an important issue.
My guest, Laphonza Butler, is a co-convener of the Raise the Wage Coalition in Los Angeles, also president of SEIU, ULTCW, and SEIU California, and she's an international vice president of SEIU. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this story. We will be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. It is a strange thing that when a rape is reported and evidence collected, that the rapist can go free for years simply because law enforcement often do not bother to follow up on the evidence. Rapists can go on to assault many more women before they are caught, if ever. They can even have the statute of limitations on their crimes expire just because no one got around to processing the evidence against them. Imagine if murderers or other criminals got the same treatment. In recent years, the huge backlog of so-called rape kits in cities around the country has proven to be embarrassing enough that there is now some action. While Los Angeles and New York have cleared their rape kit backlogs, many cities remain behind. One of my guests, Abigail Tracy, reports that Memphis is currently testing its way through 12,347 kits. Detroit found 11,341 unprocessed kits in a storage facility in 2009. Houston and Las Vegas are tackling backlogs of 6,663 and 4,385 rape kits, respectively. And there are dozens of other cities with counts in the hundreds and thousands, and many more that don't even know if they are sitting on massive piles of untested evidence. Joining me now is not only Abigail Tracy, who I just quoted, she's a reporter for Vocativ, but also Natasha Alexenko, founder of the Natasha Justice Project. Welcome to Uprising, Natasha and Abigail.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Natasha, I'd like to start with you. Can you give our audience a sense of what the Natasha Justice Project is? How did this project come about in the first place? Natasha? We're going to, okay, well, we do have Abigail with us, so we'll turn to Natasha in just a few minutes. So, Abigail, you wrote a piece in Vocativ entitled Rape Kit Backlog Grows Nationwide, Jeopardizing Prosecutions. Why don't you explain for us why there is such a huge backlog to begin with? Is there a comparable crime, for example, for which evidence is treated the same way as rape kits are?
So I think there are a lot of reasons why the backlog exists today. Two of them, one of the big things today is that DNA testing has become much more standard in police investigations, and technology has improved. So today, we have certain technologies, and crime labs throughout the country are outfitted with the ability to actually test these kits, but that wasn't so much so the case in the early 90s or 2000s. Also, a big difference has been sort of I think for a long time, sexual assault went misunderstood, and I think investigators didn't necessarily understand the serial nature of the crime to the right extent. You look at these perpetrators, and in many cases, they are serial, so they've committed not just, other sexual assaults, but many of them also have other violent crimes to their name. But I think that went misunderstood for a long time, and that's sort of kind of what everybody who I've sort of spoken with about this issue, Natasha included, have pointed to. So I think there's a combination of technology catching up and a misunderstanding of the nature of the crime. And also, I think what we have today is to clear these backlogs, it'll require a lot of manpower and it'll require money. And I think right now, those are sort of some of the obstacles that have to be tackled to kind of clear these backlogs. In terms of other crimes with similar things, I am not certain that there's at all kind of this similar backlog of evidence that has been untested as with rape kits. And I think that does go back to the crime itself and the DNA testing. I think you obviously will have some evidence because of, the DNA testing rules still hold with other DNA evidence, but I think there are just a myriad of reasons why this backlog exists.
We do have Natasha Alexenko with us. Natasha, can you tell us about the Natasha Justice Project? How did it come about?
Well, certainly I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and I'm a survivor of the backlog as well. My kit sat in a county storage facility in Manhattan collecting dust for 9.5 years. During the time my kit wasn't tested, the man that raped, sodomized, and robbed me was essentially on a nationwide crime spree. He was a one-man crime wave, and as was so eloquently mentioned earlier, he didn't just rape, he property crimes, just a range of crimes. So he didn't just victimize other women, he victimized men and children as well. Finally my kit was tested, Victor Rondon was eventually apprehended, and I got the closure that was so difficult to achieve for so many years. And I was really inspired by the prosecutors and law enforcement in my case. I know my kit sat for 9.5 years, but once the administration changed and they recognized the value of the 17,000 kits that were sitting on shelves in New York City, they really turned things around quite quickly. So I was really inspired by them, and I really didn't want to be the anomaly, especially when I found out that throughout the nation there's hundreds of thousands of kits collecting dust. And every rape kit essentially represents a human being whose body was a crime scene.
Wow.
So
I mean, 9.5 years, that's 9.5 years worth of other victims whose victimization could have been possibly prevented had your rape kit been processed and this perpetrator brought to justice. That just means that, that's just a huge failure, even if it is, something that represents a past failure. It has been a huge failure of the justice system. So, Abigail, let's talk about the fact that the excuse being given, even now, for some cities, is that just isn't enough funding to process these rape kits. Imagine if these were crimes against men.
So I think,
or mostly men. I mean, there must be some men among these.
I think when you look at the costs involved, they definitely exist. You know, I have spoken with people, and estimates to test an individual rape kit range from about $1,000 to $1,200, sometimes in upwards of $1,500 to test an individual rape kit. But so that's sort of the initial cost. You know, that's the cost of testing these kits. But that's really sort of the first step in these cases, and I think the costs down the line are also a factor. That's sort of what I've heard from law enforcement, is that, you know, maybe you do spend this $1,200 to test this kit. If you find a DNA profile from them, you incur many other costs down the road. Once you sort of reopen these cases, you have to reinvestigate everything kind of from start to finish and see the narrative. So that is the cost, but I think another issue is the manpower that these require. And I think you look at funding and you look at manpower, and like those are the two real obstacles. And municipalities, they need these because the backlog should be cleared. And I think the resources need to be available, whether that's funding and whether that's people to kind of prosecute and go through all these cases. But those are the main two challenges that people point to for the reason that we haven't been able to clear the backlog nationwide.
Now, Natasha, what about the political sort of pressure that's been growing to try to address this? What sort of movement have you seen from congressional advocates to address the national rape kit backlog?
Well, certainly, I'm actually in D.C. at the moment. There was just a hearing on Capitol Hill. It's wonderful to see lawmakers and legislators come forward, put forth legislation, and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it seems to be the same players over and over again, and you know, I admire them for their dedication and tenacity. But unfortunately, it's not, it's not across the board. I will say the positive thing is it's really a bipartisan issue because it shouldn't have anything to do with either political party. It's a public safety issue. It's a public health issue. Everyone should be on board. But I really feel like where we're getting the most traction right now is state-by-state initiatives. The federal government can only do so much to force a state into doing something specific. So we're seeing really some innovation on state levels in terms of putting legislations forward, specifically around counting, because we always talk about how many rape kits there are across the nation. We don't know. So many states, and I'm certainly a big advocate for this, are putting forth measures to say, okay, you have to let us know how many kits you have backlogged, how many kits you have unprocessed, sitting in police storage facilities, sitting in county storage facility. What does that number look like? And I think once we can, kind of quantify what that number is, I think we're going to get the general public at large to be like, oh my goodness, we've got to do something about it. And then support for further legislation, I think will be the next step.
I want to turn back to Abigail on the issue of the message that law enforcement had been sending to rapists when they, didn't process these rape kits. How have things changed now? Now that technology is better available, what happens to rape victim's rape kit when after they're raped, if they go in and get evidence collected, does it still go and sit on a shelf catching dust for years?
So I think, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, today you aren't going to see the same treatment of sexual assault victims as you did then in these kits, because DNA is expected before any jury today. What you really see is that it is much more standard today than it was, 10, 20 years ago. So what you see is, there's also been a change in dialogue about the crime of sexual assault. I think so much more progress still needs to be made, but I think understanding the serial nature of these offenders and the people that commit these crimes has been major in terms of people sort of understanding when these new rape kits come in, the importance of testing them as a way to, bring this person to justice who assailed these people throughout, So I think what you're kind of seeing is the understanding has changed. So today you're not necessarily going to see rape kits sit on shelves, but the important thing is that if we clear the backlog, we might prevent some of those new rape kits coming in. And that's sort of the cause and the importance of clearing the backlog.
And I want to talk about the larger sort of national conversations around sexual assault as they've changed. Some progress that might be that we might be seeing, but also so much work that still needs to be done, because it seems as though every other day there's a national debate and dialogue on rape. Every other day there are also members of Congress saying the stupidest and most callous things, some of which we'll get to. But one of the latest things is the HBO show, Game of Thrones, which once more has come under fire. And, pop culture is important in the way in which it influences people. And Natasha, I'm wondering what you make of the fact that yet again, the sort of showing of gratuitous rape scenes in this very popular show is coming under fire, so much so that even Senator Claire McCaskill said she was, quote, done with the show. And of course, it has its defenders saying if you don't like it, don't watch it. And, it's fiction after all. How do you respond?
It's interesting that you mentioned this, because really Game of Thrones and this whole dialogue forced me to create a blog of my own, because whereas it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the backlog, it does, because at the end of the day, the backlog is a symptom of a bigger disease. And I think, to me, with the Game of Thrones episode, and I have to say, I have not watched an episode this season, so I can't comment on that episode because I didn't watch it, but I've read all the articles, spoken with survivors, and I do read the comments, and one of the most, and this is just really really good for your listeners to understand, because this is the kind of comments you get. For those of you who watched the show, it was, and spoilers ahead, but a character was raped violently by her husband on her wedding night. And a lot of the comments in the comment sections that were quite prevalent was, well, it wasn't really a rape because she was married and she knew what she was getting into. I mean, that your wedding night, you're going to have sex. So it wasn't a rape, it was consensual. So every time we have something in pop culture like this, it's really interesting to see where people's mentalities are. And you could look at it in a positive way and say, well, they just need to be educated, or you could take it in a more negative perspective. But my goodness, I mean, something like this, bringing up sexual assault, but it's always interesting to me that it has to be like why does it have to be a TV show or a celebrity for us to have a dialogue about sexual assault?
Right.
And that's really upsetting to me. We don't talk about it unless Bill Cosby's involved, or it's a television show, or a very popular university that has a sports team, or again a national sports organization. That should not be the dialogue, because you know what? Sexual assault affects everyone. Again, the man that raped me was creating male and female victims, not just around sexual assault. So, for us to just kind of, it's a woman thing, or whatever the case may be, or it doesn't really affect me, it is really a very, very dangerous perspective to have.
Absolutely. But I mean, I do have to say that you brought up Bill Cosby, and when we talk about the issue of the serial rapist, this is, a perfect example, and giving people I think a good glimpse at what other rapists might be. Of course, he hasn't been tried in court, but if you don't ignore the 40 women now that have come forward and accused him of raping and assaulting them, which is a very difficult thing for any woman to come forward and do, but 40 of them have done it. He just seems quite incredulous about the issue. It really points to this sort of serial nature of this type of crime that often happens. I want to bring up a study that was just published on U.S. College campuses. And Abigail, I'd like to ask you a little bit about this as well. On May 20th, the Journal of Adolescent Health surveyed 480 women freshmen at a university in upstate New York and confirmed what other studies have found, that fully 20% of women on college campuses are sexually assaulted. And this points to what Natasha was just saying, that this is, ordinary women every day facing rape. What do you make of this horrific statistics? That's 1 in 5 women on a college campus is likely to be sexually assaulted.
Well, I think that, and there has been so much coverage of sexual assault on college campuses lately, and that statistic is staggering, but I absolutely, when I sort of hear that, it's not something that I question the validity of. I absolutely believe that that's a very accurate statistic. But I think one of the interesting things, and I think, studies like this are very great, they draw attention to the issue at hand, Because what needs to happen on college campuses is, well, for starters, victims need to feel comfortable at their university to come forward. Because if they don't, and the administration or people aren't aware of it, that's a problem to begin with. But the most important thing is that these administrations respond to them. Because what will happen is, and it kind of goes back to the serial nature, it's, say you sexually assaulted somebody and you learn that you were reported and nothing happened. What is the message that you're receiving in that situation? You are basically being told, that's okay, there are no repercussions for this. And it, builds upon that, or you see other people who you're in classes with, or were at a party with, and you see them treated the same way. If there aren't repercussions for these actions, people will think that in this environment, which, especially I think one of the statistics in the study really focuses on college freshmen. So you're new, it's a new environment, there's a lot of drinking, things like that. So there are all these risk factors involved. But I think it's really important to punish people or show that these will be investigated, to send a message to not just that person or that assailant, but to everybody else in the community at that university, so that you don't see these crimes continue to build.
Yes, and one of the women who has drawn a lot of attention single-handedly to the epidemic of campus rape is the Columbia student Emma Sulkowicz, who carried a mattress all over campus to publicize her rape by a fellow student. She just graduated, and the young woman garnered international attention when she started this project as her senior thesis, and the university apparently didn't address what happened to her. She finally did walk across the stage to receive her diploma recently, with several students helping her to carry the mattress with her that she'd been carrying around. And Columbia University President Lee Bollinger just ignored her and even refused to shake her hand like he shook everyone else's hand. And Natasha, I'm wondering how important it is for women like for other women to see Emma Sulkowicz's very important action as a way for, as a message that sends to them that maybe they aren't alone in experiencing what they experienced.
I think Emma's just brilliant, and she's amazing and brave. And I think really it's important. I mean, things change, and we have to understand that someone who is a survivor 30 years ago has a different way of communicating their story. And I think that the way the college students are using their creativity, not taking no for an answer in terms of having their story put out there, is amazing. And that's the thing. It goes viral, and you have that message, and other survivors of sexual assault can feel they're not alone. And I think that that's such an important thing. I cannot tell you how many survivors I've heard from that are inspired by women like Emma, have decided to come
and like
forward.
Yourself, I'm sure, Natasha.
Yeah, and that's really what it's about. It's about sending a message to say you're not alone, and that I always say this. It's not always easy to come out as a survivor of sexual assault, but I'll tell you, it's not something I ever regret doing, as coming publicly and talking about. But it's scary. I mean, because of all the things that we've been talking about, this perception that you're lying, or maybe you're flawed somehow, or that there was something you did to cause the situation. And you know what? We don't put enough onus on the person that committed the crime. And the reality is, the more of us that come forward as survivors, or the media supporting us, I think the more likely it's going to be that we're going to come out and make it safer for everyone.
Well, Abigail, speaking of media coverage, the University of Virginia story is a really interesting one. But what I want to ask you is not about the details of that case. This was basically a Rolling Stone magazine reporting a brutal gang rape on the campus of University of Virginia, details of which were later found to be questionable. The magazine retracted the story. Now the magazine is being sued by an administrator on the campus who says the article defamed her. But has this whole incident had a chilling effect on journalism, on sexual assault, and on reporting of sexual assault?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the Rolling Stone article, it's an absolute shame that the opportunity to tell these stories and highlight the fact that, the severe nature and the problem of sexual assault on campuses was lost due to poor journalism, which is essentially what the Columbia School of Journalism did say when they reviewed the article and kind of the story that they came out with. And as a journalist, like, you sort of look at what happened with that story and you see the holes from the beginning and you see the failings, and they basically kind of did exactly what they shouldn't have. Because the sad thing is, the message that they were trying to send and the issue that they were trying to highlight was the right one. Like, this is a problem, there are rapes on campus, and they need to be addressed and they need to be brought forth so people understand the crimes and everybody can come together to work toward fixing them. And the sad thing is that in this case, it was a fabricated story. The reporting ended up having massive holes in it, and it was invalidated by poor journalism, which is sad because there are so many true, accurate stories of sexual assaults on college campuses, and it's a shame that the opportunity to tell one of those stories was butchered by people not following the steps that they should have. So you have something like this, and that story went viral. It was on the national stage, and people sort of started having a conversation about it. And then when the story ended up not being accurate and embellished, what happened is the conversation changed.
Yeah.
And the conversation should have been about the issue of sexual assault, not the fact that this story was fabricated.
Well, finally, Natasha, what do you hope needs to happen now? And also, on this program, one of the things we like to do is give our audience a sense of being able to participate in social issues, issues of social justice. What can ordinary people do in terms of, either lobbying their members of Congress, or, as you said earlier, in really lobbying state officials in the states where they live, where these rape kit backlogs exist, and also just changing the conversation and the culture around treating sexual assault?
Absolutely. I think, with this cause is going to be solved by the people, by the general public. We're going to end the backlog because of the tenacity of the citizens. It's not going to happen because a politician has signed a bill or because some lab is testing kits. It's a philosophical issue, and that's why I think it's so important for every person to understand what is involved in testing new rape kits, why there's a backlog, and really about sexual assault in general, and the misconceptions around it. I think good people it's really hard to believe, but I'll tell you, I had a great experience with police officers, but so many of my fellow survivors have said they didn't test my kit because they said, oh, you're probably lying, I don't believe you, or they're never going to prosecute this, or do you know who this guy is that you're accusing? Literally, this is real, not just a movie. This is what's going on. And the reality is, according to an FBI study, only 1% of women lie about their sexual assaults. Think about what it's like to go through a rape kit exam, a 4-hour-long, arduous process, where your body is a crime scene, you're pulling pubic hair. To go through that, there's very few people. Unfortunately, there's one, like you mentioned earlier, that's center stage, but very few people, go to that trouble to make things up. So I think it's important to educate, I guess the choir, if you will, so we can kind of go out and communicate that. But yes, very much in your state, find out who's fighting. Is there a politician that has a legislation forward? And then take it from there. Support that politician, that sort of thing is so important.
I want to thank the two of you so much for spending this time with us and joining us today and shedding light on this very important issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
My guests, Natasha Alexenko is founder of the Natasha Justice Project. Abigail Tracy, a reporter for Vocativ. She recently wrote an article entitled Rape Kit Backlog Grows Nationwide, Jeopardizing Prosecutions. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Alexander Hobbs is our technical director. Federico Garcia is our audio engineer. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Uprising with Sonali. A very small monthly contribution keeps our production alive. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kohatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.